Well, everybody, I'm Cantonese Cat. Hey, everybody, Cantonese Cat here. I want to talk a little bit about cycles, where we think we are currently on the market in Bitcoin. I'm also going to focus a little bit more on miners as well. What I'm showing you here, Bitcoin weekly chart on top, the Russell 2000 chart weekly at the bottom. A lot of people, I've been hearing it for years, and people just wouldn't shut up about it. And every single time when people talk about it, I cringe a little bit. Look at how nice Bitcoin correlates with the IWM. Like, I'm not making this up. Look at how nice Bitcoin correlates with IWM, right? A lot of people keep saying how Bitcoin correlates with the Nasdaq, and it's just, I just gotta say, like, they look completely different. They really don't look anything alike based on the market structure. Although people tend to say that because from day to day, everybody just kind of think risk on Nasdaq and how it's correlated with Bitcoin. But no, actually, it correlates better with the Russell 2000 because both of these are very cycle sensitive. Both of these are very sensitive to global liquidity. And basically, what you're seeing here is almost like a mirror image between IWM and Bitcoin. So it's very important to take that into consideration before just kind of like spilling, saying, oh, it's correlated with NASDAQ or S&P 500. No, it's actually more correlated with IWM than anything. Now, I do think that if you want to play leverage of IWM and Bitcoin, if you want to do like a combination of the two to do leverage, I think that Bitcoin miners are probably going to be the best play overall for that. The Bitcoin miners are really not going to start running until you have IWM making its all-time high, until Bitcoin starts running at the same time. And that's when the miners really start to make like these crazy exponential move, because they're basically a leverage play for both. They are these like high depth company. They do a lot of offering, but this is basically a very leverage play for both of these, right? Like during euphoric times, they're gonna run like crazy, but they have to wait for IWM and they have to wait for Bitcoin to cooperate before they can really truly start to run. Where do I think we are currently on the cycle? I just want to point out, like Bitcoin and IWM, the cycle actually has been playing out very, very similarly. For Bitcoin, you have a low over here, around the time when you have the Trump administration talking about trade conflict, talking about tariffs, things like that. Both the stock market and Bitcoin had tanked around that time. And when it did tank, what happened really after that was you have a big run up in Bitcoin, and you have a little bit of a higher low over here, whereas you did have a little bit of recovery here with the Russell 2000. But during COVID, instead of making a higher low like Bitcoin did, during COVID, actually IWM actually making a lower low compared to what it was over there, right? So are we seeing a very similar phenomenon here so far? The answer is yes, actually. Like, it looks like Bitcoin was really making like a little bit of a low around maybe June to October to November 2022, whereas IWM was also making a low right here around the same time. And the Bitcoin ran up a little bit higher, kind of like it did over here, and it came back and made a higher low right around July to May October 2023, whereas IWM actually came back down and make a lower low compared to over here around October 2023. So there are a lot of these correlation over here in terms of the bear market. Now let's look at the recovery, right? In terms of Bitcoin recovery, it really looks like it was just challenging this level over here with this price action. It's really challenging this previous high over here with this price action. Pretty straightforward. What is Bitcoin doing right now? Well, it's doing very similar. It used this price action here to challenge this price action over here, and it currently is using this 6-month sideways price action here to try and challenge the previous all-time high level around here, right? IWM is also doing a very similar thing. We have this peak over here is trying to challenge the bottom of this range over here. There's a big giant range. This is the top of the range. This is the bottom of the range. And this peak over here challenged the bottom of the range. The peak over here challenged the top part of the range. And then as you go, you're trying to challenge the previous all-time high over here. IWM making another hump and trying to break back, and actually have to get up before it is able to break above this velocity over here, right? So far, where are we right now? I think that these peaks over here are trying to challenge the bottom of the range over here. The peak right around July 2024 is trying to challenge the peak that we have over here at this level, right? And I think most likely it's going to make a bump to trying to challenge the 230s or even 240s, and it's probably going to end up coming back down, back test on the level, maybe even to like 220 or 2 teens. before making further high. So if I had to make a little bit of a fractal, kind of very similar to over here, I think what's going to happen is probably going to make some highs up here, break above the range over here, get a little bit closer to the previous all-time high, then try to make it there, and then come back down, and then that's when it starts running. Do I think it's going to make a big parabolic move like it did over here? No, not necessarily. I think it might be a little bit more muted, but maybe last a little bit longer. I do think the last cycle was a lot more compressed compared to this cycle. So I think that is probably going to be a little bit more muted, and you might end up, kind of going up slower. But the move, it doesn't make the move any less powerful. I just think that it might end up just kind of having to take its time, right? Now, when you're talking about both Bitcoin and IWM really starts to beast together, and when you're talking about IWM really starts to make its all-time high again, is based on this candle over here, which is November 9th of 2020, right? Remember November 9th of 2020. We're not quite there yet. I think we might be a few weeks away from where we might be able to get this escape velocity candle over here. But yeah, November 9, 2020, what did Bitcoin do around November 9, 2020? Not much, really. Like, it was just already on an uptrend, and it looks like it wants to go higher, but it was right before it wants to start to consolidate, and right before IWM just wants to just keep running, right? So remember that, like November 9th, IWM beast moded, right? In November 9, Bitcoin starts to slow down. So what you would expect to see would be, I would actually expect maybe while IWM is trying to make that high again before really breaking out, I think Bitcoin might front run IWM, just kind of like how it front ran over here a few weeks before this big giant candle over here. I think Bitcoin might end up front running that maybe as soon as like next week, potentially. It could end up making like highs, break above the range over here. And then eventually IWM is going to follow with maybe a little bit more of an explosive move. And that's kind of what I'm thinking. Again, I wanted to think about November 9th, right? After November 9th, Bitcoin didn't do much. Before that, it did a lot. November 9th was really when IWM breaks out. So there were really only 4 miners previously that had, that was public during last cycle that have, actually I'm going to use a little bit of a different window here. You have 4 miners that had existed through the last Bitcoin halving. The last Bitcoin halving happened around May 11th of 2020, which is this candle over here, right? And you remember what I was saying, the escape velocity happened around IWM around when? November 9th, right? November 9th is very important because it really helped a lot of the miners to really break out after that. The truth is this, and I remember a few weeks before November 9th, like Bitcoin ran up and IWM did nothing, right? I just want you to remember what I said just now. Does it matter in terms of what halving is doing? I mean, like, look at how whether or not it's the price action is correlated with halving over the last few months, right? It doesn't really look like it is. So I think halving a lot of people are really taking into account of like halving being very important to the Bitcoin cycle. I still think that what's more important is more global liquidity, right? I don't know, but anyway, looking at Mara, it doesn't really seem to have much effects in terms of halving during last cycle. So I'm just gonna say, like, I'm not sure how important halving is, but certainly the run doesn't really start to happen until like maybe a few months after halving, right? I can at least say that the run didn't really start to run, and it hasn't over the last few months to run at all after the halving. Maybe we're just waiting for a few months after that, perhaps. But just looking at Mara, you know how I said that Bitcoin is running like pretty strongly a few weeks before November 9th, right, of 2020. Mara did absolutely nothing during this period of time, just like IWM, right? It did nothing during this time. And around November 9th, it also did absolutely nothing. But the week after that is really when Mara starts to explode. So I think that Mara lags behind both Bitcoin and IWM. But when it runs, it can run from $2 all the way up to $82 during the last cycle, right? But it does have a little bit of a delay. You do have to have IWM have that candle that makes all-time high, and you do have to have Bitcoin really truly get running first, and that had to happen for at least a few weeks before you have a Bitcoin miner like Mara really start to make its run, right? It's just food for thought, right? The other couple of miners that happened was around after, like, during the last Bitcoin halving. One of them is Riot. Now, Riot is a little bit of a different story. It did have a little bit of a tiny run up here during October, but really it did nothing before the November 9th IWM breakout candle, and the breakout for Riot also didn't happen until the week after that. You see, November 9th, nothing happened. November 16th is when you have this like big giant green candle. It just kept on going afterwards, right? So I don't think we quite have that moment where IWM breaks out to previous all-time high. And that we probably have to wait for another week or two after that before you really are starting to have like the miners to really make a big run. That just hasn't really happened yet. And also another thing about Riot, like currently, like Riot's price action has actually been pretty dismal. Like before the cycle before that, after halving, it actually ran up a lot, right? But here during the cycle after halving, it actually had gone down a lot. So I mean, again, I think this is maybe more correlated to IWM, to global liquidity rather than halving. But everybody's gonna kind of make their own suggestions. I don't care. I'm just showing you what I'm seeing. I do think that Riot would end up running relatively hard after maybe like a week or two after IWM breaks up to a previous all-time high, or new all-time highs. But Riot is just, this is what happened during the last cycle, is it waited for another week after IWM breakout. The other stocks that have, the other Bitcoin miner stocks that have been around since the previous halving, Bitfarms, Canadian miner Bitfarms. What happened around November 9th? Let's see, November 9th, nothing. Before that, Bitfarm did end up running a little bit higher with Bitcoin, but look at just how vicious the downtrend is. This is probably just a little bit of a bounce. November 9th, nothing happened. The week after that, big giant green candle, but got rejected, right? Can you imagine how frustrated Bitfarm holders must be during this time? Bitcoin was already gone up for like weeks and weeks, and IWM was like already bumping up back November 9th, and then Bitfarm still did nothing for the entire month and a half. Nothing. Next thing you know, it made an insane move from like 15 cents all the way to like $10 within a matter of just a few weeks, right? So that's something to consider. I think whenever IWM makes all-time, I don't think this is going to be like the same. I do think that this last cycle is more compressed. But just imagine, sometimes whenever IWM really makes its all-time high, things get pretty crazy afterwards. If you have enough liquidity kind of slushing around, things can go pretty crazy, right? Again, this halving, so far, nothing's happening for both the cycle before and after. So maybe there's some merit in terms of like halving phenomenon, but I just don't know whether or not it's related to that. I think it might be more related to global liquidity. The other stock, and finally the other public stock that I can chart when it was around before, during the last cycle's halving, was HUT 8, right? I mean, HUT 8 was around, really starting around like 2018 or so. The halving happened around May of 2020 and April 2024. So far, actually, morphology look kind of similar. We have a big run up, we have a big correction after that. But again, like I don't know whether or not it's just like global liquidity related or is it really Bitcoin related. I don't know. November 9th, when you have the IWM breakout, what happened to HUT 8? Nothing. Kind of like Bitfarms, it did nothing for like 5 weeks, right? And until next thing you know, like once it breaks above, like this is a late cycle runner. It didn't really start break above until maybe around December 14th or so. And after that, within a period of a couple months, and this really captured a lot of people's imagination, it ran from like $6 all the way up to like 64, right? So this is a little bit of a late cycle runner. It actually ended up having a little bit more of a run later on too, around November 2021. But this is a little bit of a late cycle runner that actually really didn't start to kick off until maybe a few weeks after IWM made its all-time high again, right? Same thing might happen to HUT. This might again be a little bit of a late cycle runner. I can totally see that happening. But I just kind of wanted to share with you the perspective, like why isn't the miners running yet? And a lot of people are like saying, oh, Bitcoin is making so much, like, all these highs. It's gone extremely well in the year of 2024, especially the beginning part of it, whereas miners just kind of went down like 20, 30, 40%. This is not anything that's necessarily unexpected because the pool liquidity that is benefiting miners is not actually necessarily Bitcoin, but I think it's the combination of Bitcoin and IWM. And I don't think that either, I don't think that they've really gone through that phase where they really had that breakout velocity quite just yet. So I exercise patience when it comes to these kinds of miner stocks. They are constantly diluted. They've diluted for a few years already. You don't think they diluted during the bear market? Of course they diluted during the bear market, right? I mean, like, they have to do what they have to do to kind of stay afloat. But I just wanted to kind of share with you my thoughts in terms of where I think we are in the cycle, what is required for the miners to really start to run, and and it's depending on both Bitcoin and depending on both IWM, and these miners may lag behind both, maybe sometimes by a week behind IWM, and sometimes by a few weeks to a couple months behind IWM. That's just the nature of the beast. I'm just here to share you my thoughts. Anyway, take care. Have a good one. Bye.